I was forced to choose between my dog and my husband's elitist mother until an air purifier's internal telemetry exposed her overnight stunt. When my husband and I bought our first home, we ensured it had a spacious backyard for our gentle golden retriever Oliver. But our peace was short-lived when my elitist mother-in-law Victoria arrived for a week-long visit. Victoria detested animals and immediately claimed our home was a biological hazard, suffused with toxic pet dander that triggered her severe, life-threatening asthma. The situation reached a boiling point during a formal family dinner when she staged a theatrical respiratory crisis, gasping for air and demanding we rehome Oliver immediately or face the medical consequences. My husband was frantic, completely torn between his mother's health and our family dog. Victoria thought she had staged the perfect, unarguable medical ultimatum, entirely unaware that our new premium smart air purifiers utilize localized laser particle counters that log air quality metrics down to the microgram in real time. The neighborhood we chose was quiet, lined with mature maple trees and wide sidewalks perfect for evening walks. My husband, Ethan, and I spent 5 years saving for the down payment on this charming 3-bedroom craftsman house. For us, the crown jewel was the fenced-in half-acre backyard. It was paradise for Oliver, our 6-year-old golden retriever who was essentially our first child. Oliver was exceptionally calm, well-groomed, and spent his days lounging in the sunbeams on the linoleum floor. Unfortunately, Ethan's mother, Victoria, viewed our lifestyle with deep condescension. Victoria was a woman who draped herself in designer silk, spoke in a quiet, cutting whisper, and believed that domestic perfection left no room for anything that shed hair. She had adamantly opposed our adoption of Oliver years ago, and when she scheduled a 7-day stay at our new home, I spent 48 hours straight vacuuming, scrubbing, and running high-end HEPA filtration units in every room to ensure the environment was absolutely immaculate. The moment Victoria stepped through our front door, her nose wrinkled in immediate disgust. She didn't compliment the hardwood floors or congratulate us on achieving our dream. Instead, she dramatically pulled a lace handkerchief from her purse and pressed it against her mouth. "Ethan, darling," Victoria gasped delicately, her eyes darting to Oliver, who was sitting politely by the couch, thumping his tail. "The air in here is absolutely thick with animal dander. I can already feel my throat constricting. You know how volatile my respiratory system is since my diagnosis last spring." Ethan immediately looked worried, stepping forward to take her heavy leather luggage. "Mom, I promise Harper cleaned everything. We've had 3 medical-grade smart air purifiers running on maximum capacity for 2 days straight. The ambient air quality readout is completely green." Victoria offered a cold, patronizing smile as she looked past him at me. Green text on a consumer gadget doesn't override medical reality. "Ethan, some people simply don't mind living in filth, but my specialist explicitly warned me that exposure to canine oils could land me in the emergency room. For the sake of my life, that animal needs to be kept strictly outside for the duration of my stay." I felt a sharp spike of defensive anger, but I held my tongue for Ethan's sake. Oliver was an indoor dog who slept at the foot of our bed. Forcing him into the chilly evening air felt incredibly cruel. We compromised by keeping Oliver strictly in the downstairs den, blocked off by a sturdy wooden gate. Despite this massive concession, Victoria spent the next 3 days running a relentless campaign of passive-aggressive martyrdom. Every time she walked into the kitchen, she would cough dryly, fan herself with a magazine, and make loud remarks about how her chest felt compressed. She treated me like a reckless, unhygienic child who was actively endangering her life out of sheer stubbornness. The underlying tension exploded on Friday evening. We had invited Ethan's sister Avery and her husband over for a formal dinner to celebrate our housewarming. I spent the entire afternoon preparing a prime rib roast, setting the dining room table with our finest linens. Oliver was resting peacefully behind his gate in the den, completely separated from the dining area. Halfway through the main course, just as Ethan was pouring more wine, Victoria suddenly dropped her silver fork onto her porcelain plate with a loud clatter. She clutched her throat, her chest heaving in shallow, rapid movements. I can't breathe," Victoria gasped, her voice raspy and strained. She gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white. "The dander? It's airborne. It's migrated from the den. Ethan, my inhaler. Now." The dining room erupted into absolute chaos. Ethan jumped out of his chair so fast it toppled backward onto the rug. He sprinted toward the guest suite to find her medication, his face pale with raw terror. Avery leaned over her mother, rubbing her back and glaring directly at me with sharp accusation. "Harper, this is exactly what Mom warned you about." Avery snapped, her voice rising in panic. "You prioritized a dog over your own family's safety. Look at her. She's completely suffocating." Victoria sank back into her chair, eyes rolling back slightly as she let out a loud, wheezing rattle. When Ethan rushed back into the room and pressed the inhaler into her hand, she took 2 deep puffs, trembling violently against his shoulder. After a prolonged, tense 10 minutes of collective panic, Victoria's breathing began to stabilize. She leaned heavily against Ethan, looking at me with a mixture of triumphant malice and theatrical exhaustion. "This is the absolute limit," Victoria whispered, her voice trembling but cold. "I almost died at your dinner table, Ethan. Your wife's insistence on keeping that filthy creature under this roof is a direct attack on my health. I am giving you an ultimatum right now. Either that dog is permanently rehomed by tomorrow morning, or I am leaving immediately, cutting off your inheritance trust, and ensuring the entire extended family knows that Harper values an animal over my actual survival." Ethan looked completely broken. He looked at his mother, then turned his eyes to me, completely torn. His shoulders slumped under the immense weight of his mother's calculated, emotional blackmail. "Harper," Ethan stammered softly, his eyes filled with immense guilt. "Maybe Oliver could stay at a boarding kennel just until Sunday, just so we can calm things down?" "No, Ethan," Victoria interrupted sharply. "A temporary kennel isn't enough. The house is contaminated. The dog must be gone permanently, or I will never step foot in your life again." I looked at Victoria's smug face, noticing that despite her supposed near-death experience, her complexion was perfectly normal, and her blood oxygen monitor ring wasn't flashing. I felt a sudden, deep intuition that something was profoundly wrong with her story. "Before we make any permanent life decisions regarding our family pet," I said, my voice remarkably calm as I pulled my phone from my pocket, "let's check the real-time environmental telemetry from the guest bedroom smart purifier. It has a dedicated laser particle sensor that uploads microscopic air mass data directly to my cloud dashboard." I opened the app, bypassing the standard home screen, and loaded the raw, undeletable engineering data loop for the last 24 hours. I scrolled back through the chronological graph on my screen, my finger tracing the jagged blue line that represented the household's microscopic particulate matter count. The room fell into a tense, expectant silence as Ethan and Avery watched me, while Victoria leaned back, a faint sneer playing at the corner of her lips. She was completely confident that her medical narrative was airtight. "Let's look at the timeline from last night," I said, laying the phone flat on the table so Ethan could see the high-resolution charts. "Our smart purifiers continuously sample the ambient air using an optical laser that measures particulate matter down to 2.5 microns, which is the exact cellular size of pet dander, dust, and smoke. A normal clean indoor reading should hover around 12 micrograms per cubic meter." I pointed to the long, flat baseline on the left side of the chart. "As you can see, from the moment Victoria arrived until last night at midnight, the guest bedroom air quality was pristine, hovering right around 9 micrograms. If my house were suffused with toxic dander, as Victoria claims, this line would have been spiking consistently for 3 days straight." "But it didn't," Avery scoffed, crossing her arms. "Harper, what does a graph from last night have to do with Mom having an actual asthma attack right now? You're just trying to deflect from the fact that your dog caused this?" "I'm getting to that," I replied calmly, zooming in on the 2 Wattas AM timestamp. "Look at what happened 2 hours after we all went to sleep." Suddenly, at exactly 2:14 a.m., the guest bedroom sensor records an unprecedented, catastrophic spike. The particulate matter count shoots up from 9 micrograms to a staggering 550 micrograms in less than 60 seconds. Ethan leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he analyzed the data. He knew how meticulous I was with our home network, but seeing the raw numbers clearly shocked him. 500? Harper, that's worse than the air quality during a forest fire. What could cause a localized spike that severe in a closed bedroom in the middle of the night? "The machine's automated system diagnostics tell us exactly what happened," I said, tapping the corresponding error log icon beneath the graph. "At 2:13 a.m., the internal fan speed was manually overridden and turned off via the physical control panel on top of the unit. 1 minute later, the laser sensor was completely blinded by a massive, high-volume influx of concentrated, heavy household dust. And 30 seconds after that, the physical fan was turned back on to high-capacity mode, forcing that cloud out into the room's ventilation loop." I turned my head slowly to look directly at Victoria, whose patronizing expression was beginning to crack. Her eyes darted rapidly from the phone screen to her daughter, a faint bead of sweat appearing near her hairline. "The physical footprint of this data is highly specific," I continued, keeping my tone entirely conversational and measured. "This isn't a slow, natural accumulation of floating dog hair. This is what happens when someone manually disables a filtration system, opens the primary filter housing chamber, and dumps a concentrated mass of foreign debris directly into the intake cylinder before turning the machine back on to scatter it into the room. And since the only person in that locked guest suite at 2 in the morning was Victoria, She is the only one who could have keyed in that manual override sequence. This is absolute madness, Victoria suddenly hissed, her voice abandoning its fragile, breathless rasp and returning to its usual sharp, aristocratic register. You are using an uncalibrated piece of plastic to accuse me of sabotaging my own lungs. Ethan, are you seriously going to sit there and let this woman insult me with technobabble while I am still recovering from a near-fatal medical event? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He was staring at the chart, his mind clearly racing as he connected the pieces. He remembered the faint sound of clattering plastic he had vaguely heard from the hallway in the dead of night, a sound he had dismissed as his mother simply getting a glass of water. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice dropping into a low, heavy tone I had rarely heard him use before. The smart Purifier logs are hard-coded into the internal flash storage. The app doesn't create data out of nowhere. Why would the machine register a manual button sequence at 2 in the morning if you were asleep? How should I know? Victoria snapped, her lace handkerchief now crumpled tightly in her fist. Perhaps your expensive little gadget glitched. Or perhaps your wife altered the logs herself to frame me because she detests my presence in this house. I didn't say a word. Instead, I stood up from the dining table, walked calmly down the hallway toward the utility closet, and retrieved the primary upright vacuum cleaner we kept for the guest wing. I brought it back into the dining room, setting it down on the linoleum floor beside Victoria's chair. Avery watched me with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. "Harper, what are you doing with the vacuum?" When I cleaned the guest suite before Victoria arrived, I completely emptied the vacuum's transparent plastic dust canister and washed it out, I explained, pointing to the collection bin. But look at it now. It's about a quarter full of thick gray dust, lint, and carpet fibers. And if you look closely at the upper rim of the canister lid, there are fresh, white scrape marks, the exact physical layout that occurs when someone hurriedly forces the plastic bin open upside down against a hard metal edge, like the intake grill of an air purifier. Ethan stood up, stepping toward the vacuum. He knelt down, his fingers brushing against a faint, powdery residue that was smeared along the side of the machine's external casing. He looked up at his mother, his eyes reflecting a deep, painful realization. "Mom," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of betrayal and profound disbelief. "You didn't have an asthma attack because of Oliver. You went into the utility closet while we were asleep, took the dirt canister out of the vacuum, and stuffed it into your bedroom purifier to artificially contaminate your own air. You staged an entire life-threatening emergency just to force me to throw away my dog." Victoria's jaw tightened, her face twisting into an expression of raw, unbridled fury as her sophisticated facade completely dissolved. She realized she had been thoroughly cornered by the very technology she had dismissed as a cheap consumer toy. "And what if I did?" Victoria suddenly barked, throwing her crumpled handkerchief onto the table, her voice ringing clear and strong without a single hint of respiratory distress. "That animal is a disgusting nuisance, Ethan. It ruins the carpets, it smells like the outdoors, and it completely degrades the dignity of your home. I am your mother. I gave you everything. I built your inheritance, and I should not have to share a roof with a beast just because your weak-willed wife refuses to understand our social standing. I gave you an ultimatum, and I expect you to honor it." Avery sat back in her chair, her mouth slightly open as she stared at her mother in sheer horror. She had spent years defending Victoria's elitist behavior, but watching her openly admit to sabotaging her own environment just to manipulate her son was a boundary she couldn't rationalize. Ethan stood perfectly straight, his chest rising and falling as he looked at the woman who had controlled his emotional life for 30 years. The habitual look of anxious compliance was completely gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, unwavering clarity. "The ultimatum is over, Mom," Ethan said, his voice remarkably steady. "But you aren't the one dictating the terms anymore." Victoria froze, her silver fork still hovering an inch above her plate. The sharp, authoritative tone she had used her entire life to dominate family discussions suddenly carried no weight in our dining room. She looked at Ethan, waiting for the familiar stutter or the nervous glance that usually signaled his submission. But it never came. "What did you just say to me?" Victoria asked, her voice dropping into a dangerous, quiet hiss. "I said the ultimatum is over," Ethan repeated, his voice carrying a calm, absolute finality that sent a shiver down my spine. He didn't yell. He didn't slam his hand on the mahogany table. He simply stood there, grounded, looking at his mother not as an intimidated child, but as the protector of his own household. "You gave me a choice between my family and your control, Mom, and I am choosing my family." Avery looked back and forth between them, her hands trembling as she set her wine glass down. Ethan, wait, let's not do anything reckless. Mom shouldn't have done what she did, but she's still our mother. We can find a way to resolve this without what, Avery? Ethan turned his gaze to his sister, his expression softening slightly but remaining firm. Without acknowledging that she brought a bag of vacuum dust into a closed bedroom, intentionally triggered her own minor respiratory issues, and then sat at our table pretending to suffocate just to force us to get rid of Oliver. She didn't just lie to us, Avery. She weaponized her own health to break up our home. If Harper hadn't looked at those logs, we would be sitting here right now planning how to break our son's heart by giving away his dog. Victoria slammed both hands flat against the table, her heavy gemstone rings clinking sharply against the wood. I will not be spoken to like a criminal in a house that my family's legacy made possible. I have supported you, Ethan. I have guided your career. I have ensured that you have a safety net that most people can only dream of. If this is the disrespect I receive in return for my devotion, then I am done. I will have my attorney remove your name from the estate management trust by Monday morning. Let's see how well your smart home functions when you are cut off entirely from the family assets. It was her ultimate card, the financial guillotine she had used to keep her children in line for a decade. Every career choice, every holiday plan, and every major purchase Ethan had ever made had been shadowed by the implicit threat of that trust fund being revoked. But instead of panicking, Ethan let out a soft, tired laugh. He looked down at the linoleum floor for a moment, then looked back up, a look of immense relief washing over his face. Take it, Mom, Ethan said quietly. Call your attorney at 9 a.m. on Monday. Remove my name from the trust. Remove it from the inheritance. Cancel the shared accounts. I don't want another single dollar that comes with the condition that I have to let you manipulate my wife and child. Victoria's face turned an ashen gray. The absolute certainty in Ethan's voice had stripped her of her power. She looked at Avery, silently begging her daughter to intervene, but Avery just looked away, staring intensely at her napkin, completely crushed by the realization of what her mother had done. Harper and I bought this house with our own savings, Ethan continued, walking over to the den gate and unlatching it. Oliver, sensing the shift in the room's energy, trotted out quietly, his nails clicking softly on the floor. He walked straight over to Ethan, leaning his heavy golden head against Ethan's knee. Ethan reached down, burying his fingers in the dog's thick fur. We pay our own mortgage. We buy our own groceries. We don't need your trust fund to build a life. But what we do need is a home where our boundaries are respected. He looked directly into his mother's eyes. My temporary code for the smart deadbolt expires in exactly 12 hours. I think it would be best if your bags were packed and you were out of this house long before that happens. Victoria stood up, her posture rigid, trying desperately to cling to whatever dignity she had left. She pulled her designer silk shawl tightly around her shoulders, her chin tilted high, though her hands were visibly shaking. You are making a catastrophic mistake. Ethan, she whispered, her voice cracking slightly under the weight of her cracking facade. You are discarding your family for an animal and a vindictive woman who tracks your every breath with a smartphone. Mark my words, you will regret this day. The only thing I regret, Ethan said, holding the front door open for her, is not looking at the data sooner. Goodbye, Mom. Victoria didn't say another word. She marched down the hallway to the guest suite, her heels clicking aggressively against the hardwood. Within 45 minutes, the front door clicked open and shut, and the sound of her luxury SUV engine fading down Whisper Pines Road signaled the return of our sanctuary. Avery and her husband left shortly after, offering quiet, awkward apologies. When the house was finally silent again, the heavy cloud of tension that had hung over our home for 3 days completely vanished. Later that evening, I sat on the living room rug with my head resting against Ethan's shoulder. Oliver was stretched out between us, snoring softly as the high-end HEPA purifiers hummed quietly in the background, their digital readouts glowing a steady, peaceful green. Ethan reached over, taking my hand in his. I'm sorry it took a literal data log to make me see what she was doing, Harper. I've been conditioned my whole life to just accept her version of reality, to keep the peace. You don't need to apologize, I said, leaning up to kiss his cheek. You stood up for our family when it counted. That's all that matters. Victoria did end up calling her attorney that Monday. We received a cold, formal letter confirming Ethan's removal from the family trust 2 weeks later. But without her financial shadow hanging over our heads, we felt lighter than we ever had before. We didn't lose our inheritance that weekend. We bought our absolute freedom. And every time I look at our smart home dashboard, I smile, knowing that the best security system we ever invested in wasn't designed to keep out strangers. It was designed to protect our peace from the people who claim to love us the most.